Hello folks, welcome to another basic introduction to Python, and today we are looking at Python data structures. Specifically, we are looking at Python list. Python offers several data structures for manipulating collections of data. Namely, you have the tuple, dict, and set, and these are suited for different use cases. It is very important that when you have several collections or large amount of data that you want to manipulate, that you know when to use one of these data structures. So before we go any further into the data structures that Python offers, a quick revision of the basic data types that we have. Namely, you have numbers and then you have text, which is initialized in one of the examples that I've listed here. But in addition to these numbers and text, you also have booleans that you use during Python decision making when you have to run your if statements. It is very important that we understand the basic data types because this is what we use in constructing our data structures. Now, before I go any further, you would notice that when I run the code examples that I have in the notes, you will see several lines beginning with the pound sign. These are simply comments and they do nothing else than to give the programmer the opportunity to add notes to the code that they are writing. In addition, you will see the print function also, which is simply a way to display your code to the console. And in the Jupyter notebooks that I'm using, this may not be a problem, but when you're writing Python scripts ending in .py files, this may be an important point to know. Of course, there are several other ways to print outputs, but it's important that you understand what I'm doing. So when you're using Python like a calculator, it's very easy to work, when you have just a few variables. So you take the example that I have here, for example, that I have a few salaries that I want to use in some calculations. And for these salaries, I could easily initialize these three variables with some values here. And so let me just run this cell. And what I could easily do is also calculate the total salary for these 3 months, and let me do that and print to the output. You can see that my total salary there I have is 3,500. What if I wanted to do some further calculation with this? I want to do the average. I could also go ahead and then do the computation and print the output to the screen. And this is very easy. I'm working with three variables. All right, so the question comes in when we have several data variables that we want to print. Okay, so for example, if we have salaries for a whole year, or for example, if we have salaries for 1,000 people, how then do we go about doing the same computation? And that's where Python lists come in. So giving another example here is, let's say I have fruits that I want to keep track of in my program. I could I'll create a Python list like this that would be used to store my fruits. And it's very simple to create a Python list. You would demarcate a Python list using the square brackets, as you can see left and right, and inside the square bracket would be a list of values separated by commas, and each value here we have strings. There's names of fruits, bananas, banana, mango, orange. And when I print the output to the screen, you can see that my list is nicely formatted here, containing 3 items. So this is the very simple way to go about creating your list. You could also create an empty list, and depending on the case that you have, you might want to have an empty list and later on in your program to fill it with some values. All right, so you can create an empty list just using the square brackets without any values in it, and you can see the output also demarcated or displayed over there. Now, the thing about list creation is that there is also a dedicated function for creating lists in Python, and that's the list function here. Now the convenience of using this method is that you're able to convert other collections to a list, and we will talk about this later on when we have seen the other types of data structures that we have. Now, the cool thing about list that we need to take note of is the fact that a list allows you to store multiple items. You can think about it like storing multiple variables in a single variable, right? So, or storing multiple values in a single variable. So here our variable name is the fruit, as you can see, and the values is the fruit names that we have here. So just the same example that we had. Now if we wanted to do this the hard way, we could have also done this as well and done something like fruit 1, fruit 2, and then fruit 3. But doing this denies us the opportunity to manipulate the variables together as a group, right? And that's why doing this may not be advantageous. But with this, there comes several methods which I'll look at, or several ways to manipulate the data in the collection. Now, this would work nicely because we have just 3 variables. But if your list grows to say 100 or 1,000, then you can see that doing this doesn't work nicely. The other cool thing about Python lists is that you can store multiple items. In fact, you can store another list inside one list. So for example, that we have different collections of fruits. We have some hard fruits, and I have listed them out here: the peanut, cashew nut, and then we have some soft fruits, mango, and then grapes. What if you wanted to create a list that is a collection of these two collections? You could also do that. So let me run this cell, and you can see that my fruits here is a list of lists, right? So this collection is one, and then the other collection here is also another one. And this is the cool thing about using a data structure like a list. It gives you a nice level of, or way to group pieces of data that you want to manipulate together. The other thing about lists that you should also notice that you can store a mix of different data types. So as we saw in the beginning, you have text, you have numbers, you have booleans. So let's say I want to keep track of my things being a variable that contains my son, daughter, truck. I have some cash, and then a boolean that says that I'm always true, right? Yes. So if I print out my things, you can see the values listed here nicely: the son, daughter, track, the money with being a number, and then true being a boolean. And all of these can be nicely collected in a list without problems. So depending on your use case, you may do this, all right? But there are times that the list that you have should contain the same kind of items, and so this is something that you can do if you're working with a list. But then going beyond these few points, when you have created your list, what can you do with it? So you can retrieve items, you can do calculations, you can add new items, remove items, do counts. You can filter also the items based on a certain condition. So let's go through the items one by one and start with retrieving items. Now, one of the things you might want to do is to take a look at the values that you have in your list. And the way you can do that with a list is to use the index of the item. So every item inside your list is numbered starting from 0. So son is at position 0, daughter position 1, track 2, and it continues till the last item. And the cool trick about this index is that if you know the number of items in the list, you know that the last item will be at the position number of items minus 1. So let's create our list here. Again, we've done this before. Let's see the thing at index 1. It's daughter, right? We could also update this and check out the item at position 0, and that's the sun. And this would be the same for all the items. Now, if you, how many items do we have? We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 items. So let's see if I expect the last index to be position 5 minus 1, that is 4. And if I run this, that's true. What if I go to position 5? And you can see that I get an error because I cannot retrieve the item at that position. There is nothing over there. All right, so this is how lists usually behave. Okay, so we can fix this error and then go on to the next thing. Now, if you wanted to do calculations, you could easily do that by combining it with some functions that you write by yourself, or you can use some built-in functions. For this simple example, I'm going to use two built-in functions, the sum function and then the length function. So they work just like their names describe. The length is used for checking the length of a sequence. So let's say I have this example here. I have my salaries for a couple of months that I have saved in the salaries variable, and you can see that these are all numbers. Now, if I wanted to calculate my average salary over the number of months here, what I could do is to use the sum function, and the sum function nicely works with a collection. So I can pass. Now, these built-in functions that we have require some inputs. I'm using the salaries, the collection, as the input to the sum function, and then I want to calculate the number of items that I have to be able to calculate the average. I use the length function, which also requires as input a collection, and so I'm passing the salaries collection to the length function, and using the implementation allows it to give me the number of items in the collection. So the next step is to calculate the average by doing a simple division and then printing the result. And you can see that the result is printed nicely. Now you could go ahead and format this result, but that is going to be the focus of another presentation later. The other thing that you can do with a list is to add items. And using a list method called append, we can add items to a list that we have already created. The quick thing to note here is that all the Python constructs that we work with called objects have methods, which are simply functions connected with these objects, and they allow us to manipulate the objects that we create. So here the myThings variable that we created is an object in Python. It has methods that we can use to manipulate the object itself and the items that it holds. So for example, if I wanted to add a new thing to my thing, let's say I want to add a friend to my things, I'm going to use the append method that allows me to add new values to the collection. And when I print out my friends, my things that I have, you can see the last addition goes to the end. So that's how you add something to an existing list. You can also remove items from a list, sometimes as part of a calculation that you are doing or some result that you need to have. And the method for doing this is rightly named remove. So let's say for some reason I want to remove my friend from my things. I could simply call the remove method on my things and pass it the value that I want to remove, and the result is that my things, when I run this, you can see that my things, the friend is removed from my things. Now if you were to run this again and the value that you are trying to remove is not in the list, you are going to have an error. So that is the thing to know about list method remove. Now to go on to illustrate the next point, let's add a few things to my thing. So I'm going to do two append statements, and you can see. So the point of doing this is to illustrate the fact that you can also add duplicate values to the collection. A list doesn't care about the values themselves. Whatever you add to the list would be fine. Now, to count items inside your list, you can use the count method. For counting, you can count the total items in the list, which we have already seen an example of, or you can count specific items in a list. So for example, in my things, I know that I have a son there. What if I have lost track of my sons and I want to count how many sons I have? I could simply call the count method and pass it the value that I want to count, and let's see the output of this query. It prints out 1 here and says that I have only one son in the list. What about cousins? Let's do that also. And you can see that there are 2 cousins rightly, as we did because we added 2 cousins to my things. What or how many items do we have all together in my things? For that, we use a built-in method called length, which just requires that you put in the collection that you want to count the things inside, and this is how it works. So this is a built-in function that works with all kinds of collections that you can create. All right, so the last thing that we want to look at when it comes to list is filtering. For filtering, I'm going to demonstrate this quickly, but to go further into it, we may need to have a little more understanding of Python functions. And this is how it works. So again, recalling the salaries variable, this is how it looks like. What if I wanted to see salaries that are greater than 13? You can see there's a 13 here. I could simply call the filter method. That is the method that we are using here to filter. All right, but inside the filter method, it also takes a function which I have written using the lambda construct, and this filter method also takes the collection that we want to manipulate. So 2 things that the filter method requires: a function to manipulate the collection, and then the collection that we want to manipulate. And so this is the output. The final list here is to convert, because this filter method doesn't give us the kind of output we want. And so the final list here is to convert it to a list so that we can see the output. All right, so this is it. What if I wanted to see salaries less than 13? How would I go about this? I could simply change this as well, and then see the result as follows. And you can see that the output has correctly updated to the condition that we have. And so that is how you may also do filtering in a Python list. There are several other list methods available on the list object, and this we can use the inspection function that Python has. It's called the dir. It lets you look into an object that you have in Python. You can see the properties and the methods available on the object. So let's quickly take a peek at the list method. And so you can see several attributes that a list object has, and then the methods. That's what we are interested in for the moment. Okay, so at the bottom here, you can see append, you can see clear, copy, count, extend, index, insert, pop, remove, reverse, and sort. And all these methods are available when you create a list. And so you can take some time and investigate what these methods can do for your list. But for now, we are going to leave it here and continue later on as we explore more data collection. So I hope this works for you. Let me know if you have some questions. Thank you.